All right, thanks for tuning in, everybody. This is Stephen King Rules, and this episode we are talking about 1983's Christine. And I have to say that this episode was the first one that felt like work going into, mainly because this is the one Stephen King story that I know I'm not the biggest fan of, so I wasn't really looking forward to reading it and watching it, but I made it through it. So, what are your thoughts on Christine overall as a Stephen King story?
Okay, well, I had not reread Christine since I was 16, so it's been almost a decade, and I had never seen the movie. All I could remember about the story was that I fucking hated Arnie. I thought from what I could remember from 16, I was like, he's like school shooter vibes. I think he's creepy. I think he's weird. He's like one of those guys on My Strange Addiction who's like sleeping with his car. Um Now when I picked up the book again and I started reading it, first of all, I was like maybe my memory is just going bad because I felt so sad for Arnie. I was like, "Oh man, this ugly down on his
I,
luck kid."
I know after reading it this time, I know what it is now that I've always kind of been like, ugh. And it's not like I hate this story. It's just I remembered from like the last time I had read it, which was probably wasn't wasn't horribly long ago. It was within like the last 10 years too, um, and it was because I got a copy of the movie on VHS, and before I watched it, I wanted to read the story again. Just when I went to watch the movie, I wanted to like to have it in my mind if it was a good adaptation or not. And this was back in the days of our old podcast on horror heads, and one of the running themes of that show was we tied almost every episode, we would reference John Carpenter at least
Mm.
once, usually. And it was most of the time, 90% of the time, it was done inadvertently. We would just be talking about something and it would somehow lead to Michael Myers or Halloween or something. And this is a John Carpenter movie. This time, when I was picking it up, getting ready to read it, I was like, oh man, I don't really enjoy this story, but I couldn't really remember why. And then I read it, and it clicked for me this time what it was, and it's because it's even though this isn't the only Stephen King story that he goes back to like the 50s for
Mm.
inspiration and stuff, this whole story like feels like doesn't feel like a Stephen King story, even though it's told in his style and his voice and stuff. But it feels like it's a story from the 50s somehow. Like it just feels like an old timey story. Like it's weird. Like if that makes sense, but that's what it was. That's what it is for me. Just like the 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 thing, the whole thing just seemed like it was out of place almost
Yeah.
because it's just like it just doesn't feel right for a Stephen King story. I don't know why that it just feels like it's in the wrong time period.
Mm. It feels dated. That yes,
Yeah,
I would agree with you there. It does not The timeline that the story is set in does not feel consistent with the tone of the story. Um, I will say I enjoyed reading it through this time more than I did when I was 16. So that's good. Um, I can appreciate the like major theme of like friendship. And to me, this is very much a story of like going through high school, growing up, how the people around you change so much and how obsession um with looking a certain way, having certain items can change you as a person. And like this book is written from the perspective of Dennis. You know, the only first person storytelling we get is when it's Dennis talking. And so I think that's also interesting, like viewing Arnie and LeBay's possession of Arnie through the lens of his best friend. But that being said, if I was going to recommend a Stephen King book to someone who has never read a Stephen King book before, this would not be my first pick.
And it's not even that it's one of his older stories, because that's one of the things I was kind of thinking of when I was trying to think, well, what is it about this that I don't like? And I was kind of, well, maybe it's just from that era. And
Mm,
because there are a few of the other stories from the late 70s and early 80s that aren't the best stories of his, but then there's also that holds true though throughout his whole career though. Like,
mm.
there's a bunch of books from like, not a bunch, but there are certain books maybe from the late 80s that are kind of like, that's not the best Stephen King story. And then there's some from the 90s, and then there's some from the 2000s, and there's even some more of the recent ones where you're like, that's okay. Like I don't even remember that story.
Yeah.
And so I don't know that it's necessarily that, but yeah, it's just, it's a weird, yeah, it's a weird story. Yeah, I don't know. It's not my favorite though, but it is an okay story though. Like,
Yeah.
I didn't really mind reading it this time. Um, and we're spending a lot of time talking about the book, but even so with the movie, it's when I watched the movie wasn't as bad as I was seemed to think it was. And I think it's just, again, it's like, because it's not my thing. Like I don't really like, I'm not like the biggest car guy, and so I don't want to watch a movie about a car really. So
I will say one more thing about the book that I enjoyed is the ending of this book. And I feel like you said, you know, this was not a book that was necessarily hard or unenjoyable to read. As far as like the pacing of this book is pretty tight and consistent. You know, sometimes Stephen King can kind of go on and on about setting and people, and this is a pretty cohesive book. There's not an exorbitant amount of characters to keep track of. You know, it's kind of the core group of people, a couple people on the outside. But the ending of this book, I think, is one of Stephen King's cooler endings. As far as, I mean, if anybody hasn't read the book, spoiler warning, but the book ends and, you know, everyone kind of goes their separate ways and Arnie is not alive. But then Dennis is starting to receive like this newspaper article about one of the people involved who was killed by a car. And then he starts to wonder if Christine is back from the dead, um, and if she's going to come after all of them. And I love an open ending in a Stephen King book.
the other thing that in the book that I always thought was kind of interesting was, which he does this a lot, but there's no explanation to the evil at all. There's no origin for Christine. It's just, it starts with Arnie like seeing this car and deciding that he needs it, and then it just goes into the story. Whereas the movie, which is Hollywood, they open up with the factory scene trying to give it some sort of origin and
Yeah.
stuff, which is, I mean, it is what it is. So
Yeah. I did think that it was interesting. You know, I feel like any movie nowadays, especially, it's interesting to see it in older movies. It is almost like every little thing has to be written out and explained for people. And I feel like back in the day that wasn't as common, but we see it a lot now with people with short attention spans, especially in like
Oh yeah.
Netflix or Amazon produced films where everything has to be explained. And I would agree with you that I think that's one of the things about the book that is so interesting is you always kind of wonder like, is it Christine itself? Is it LeBay's anger and frustration and hatred? You know, um, is it some other spirit? What is making Christine evil? Whereas the movie is like, no, she's evil, just a bitchy
Yeah,
car.
you see, you had mentioned earlier about LeBay possessing Arnie during in the book, and
Mm,
one of my notes about the book was, is this a possession story or is it a ghost story or is it both?
mm,
Because it's a little bit of both. Or I mean, maybe Stephen King intended that LeBay was possessing both the car and Arnie, so
mhm.
maybe it is a straight up possession story. But in the movie, though, it's neither. It's straight up just the car is evil. Like, I mean, I guess you could take it as a possession thing, but I mean, there's no like, because LeBay was kind of brushed to the side a little bit. I mean, he's not even really in it. The character that's there is a combination of LeBay and then his brother. So
Yeah.
it's because it's a combination of the two into one.
It is interesting to see how different the story is when you take it at face value from the book and the interpretations you can make based on that material versus if you wouldn't have read the book and were just to watch the movie. I feel like you would walk away with a very different experience and understanding of what the book was really saying based on just the movie in itself. Um, but yeah, I don't necessarily think that it was a bad decision to have the movie be just really about Christine and Christine being evil. Um, I feel like that's a little easier to digest and understand.
In the movie, they combined a couple of the characters, like we were talking about the two LeBay characters, um, into one, and then um, they did take a lot of like it, again. What to kind of repeat what you were saying, if you didn't read the book and then you just watch the movie, like you're kind of missing certain aspects of it and stuff. But I thought it was funny though that they did change a lot of that up, but then a lot of the stuff that's in the movie though is like lifted right from the book, certain parts of it anyway, like especially like a lot of the dialogue was just like right from the page to the script, which is okay when they do that. Um, the other thing that they changed though was, which I thought was a big thing in the story, was they changed how the LeBay character and his family, they changed it not a lot, but they did change it a little bit of how they were killed by Christine. And
Mm,
so again, kind of changing just a little thing where it kind of keeps the feel of the story, but it changes it enough to where you're like, well, that's not exactly what happened, or that wasn't exactly what Stephen King was trying to say with that. Because one of the things that, um, like the big difference was the LeBay character was already dead,
mm,
and in this story, Christine killed him. Like it was
yeah,
Christine that was like, "Oh, I'm done with you." And in the book, that was not it at all. Like it was. I don't remember how he died. He just was dead, didn't he? Just die? Like they bought the car and then he
he was
just
dead. Yeah.
died. And then the other thing too that the one of the other things that they took out that I was okay with was the whole like love triangle between Dennis and Lee and um, Arnie and stuff. Because again, one of the things with Stephen King that there's a couple of things there's a couple of complaints with Stephen King that I have. One is that there's three things. One is that sorry to keep growing the list, but one is that he does, like a lot of authors and stuff, like they feel like it's this, oh, you're telling a story, well then there has to be a love interest in there, so like there has to be a love story in your story, like,
Mhm.
so like it's almost in every Stephen King story there is a love story in there somewhere, and sometimes it feels like kind of forced, and that's kind of how felt like in this one. I was like, what why can't they just like be teenagers? Why do they all have to, like, which, and I know teenagers are horny or whatever, but like we don't have to explore like the love aspect of every, oh, there's a couple, there's a guy and a girl in here that gotta get together, like that doesn't have to happen in every story. My other couple of complaints about Stephen King is, and this is a complaint I have about a lot of authors, is when they're writing and stuff and they're like, oh, this isn't me speaking, this is my character speaking or whatever, so then my character is going to be the most racist person in the world. I'm like,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
um, and then the other thing that Stephen King does that I'm not the only one that this drives crazy, but when you're talking about people, you don't have to describe their genitals ever.
No.
You don't ever
No.
have to describe their genitals,
He does that
especially if
in
they're under 18.
Yes, and it's like, you know, I can't speak for everybody in the world, but when I'm going about my day-to-day life, if I'm thinking about myself, and I would like if I were gonna describe myself, I'm not talking about my genitals. I'm
Right.
not that's not the first thought in my head. Yeah. Yeah, I would agree with those complaints. I think if I were to add a fourth, this sounds like we're just bashing Stephen King. I promise we do love him and his work. But I will say that he has written some great female characters, but especially in his older books, the way he writes women, they are either like the most gorgeous, beautiful woman, or they are like an ugly troll. There's like no normal women in his books. They're either supposed to be, it's like good and evil, this like beautiful angelic person like Lee, or like Arnie's mom, who's just like evil and terrible in the book and controlling and manipulative. And he doesn't really have an in between. And I feel like his male characters, for the most part, um, you know, are typically normal and like well fleshed out and well written. And I think you will agree with me here. The best female character he's ever written is Holly Gibney.
Yep.
And she is normal. I feel like she is written as close to a normal woman and a normal person as Stephen King has written.
Yeah, and I can't remember the name of the actress that portrayed her on the Mr. Mercedes series, but I do remember, and maybe I'm in the minority if I don't know, but I remember the first time I saw that show, and then she came on, and I was like, oh, that's weird. They actually found Holly. They found
Yeah.
the character. So, and then there's nothing. I don't have anything wrong with what's her face from Wicked that played Cynthia. Um,
Oh,
that
Riva.
Yeah, that played her in the HBO show. But like, I was like, that's not Holly. Like that.
Yeah.
Like, I'm sorry, you're a great actress, but that character's not Holly at
Yeah.
all. So yeah, I was hopeful, if, and I would assume that they do come back to, they probably will revisit Holly at some point. Because I mean, there's other stories out there with her. So I always wanted, if they were going to do that, I wish they would have gotten that actress from the Mr. Mercedes show to continue on with it. So maybe they will in the future. I don't know what else they have going on with her. So what was the other thing? Because there's something else I just read the other day that they, not, it wasn't a Holly thing, but they're planning on doing a Desperation. movie or a
Oh,
series. Um, and I don't know if you, I don't even know if you know this or not, but if you remember back in, it would have been, I guess it would have been like in the late in the late 1990s or early 2000s. Um, Stephen King kind of got like a little gimmicky there for a while.
oh,
Um, so like he did this. I don't even know if if it ever came out in any other form, but he did this one thing one time where he did like a web series. I
oh,
can't remember what the story was called, but like on his website or on some other website, like it was like once a month or once a week, like a chapter of the story came out. And I don't
oh.
even remember if the whole thing came out before they gave up on it. But anyway, and whenever whenever Desperation came out, so he wrote Desperation, and then Regulators came out as
Mm.
Richard Bachman released that book like at the same time, and they had the same characters in them, but it was a different story, and they were the same characters, but they were different characters. And so anyway, I was reading this article about that they were making Desperation. I can't remember if it's a show or if it's going to be a movie, but everybody in the comment section was like, "Well, I hope that they're going to make the Regulators at the same time with the same cast." But yeah, there was that was right around the time that uh, in the same time period when the Green Mile came out, and so like and
Oh,
you have that book, and so again
yep,
that was kind of gimmicky how that came out like
in
one
the sections.
yeah in the I don't remember how if that came out once if one of those little books came out a month or if it was how that came out. But I remember like when that came out, like yeah, like oh, it's that new Stephen King story is supposed to go out, and then go to the bookstore and get it. Yeah, you were talking about the ending, and the one thing with the ending of the movie compared to the book that I kind of felt was like a cop out was again, like they killed off Arnie, which I felt was like a okay, that's a safe thing for Hollywood to do. You kill off the quote unquote bad guy, even though you know he wasn't really the bad guy. But in the book, they essentially they killed off his whole family,
Yeah.
and like in this one, they didn't do that at all. Which I can, man, you could have done like a little bit more damage at the end because that was the one thing that was a little disappointing. In I guess it's more of a product of its time than anything. If they were to remake Christine like nowadays, I'm sure like most of the kills would be somewhat accurate or
Mm.
as close to book accurate as possible. But like a lot of the kills in the book compared to what they were in the movie were like not the same at all. I mean, basically
Yeah.
every kill in the book is just basically, oh, he got ran over. That's about it. Because like the when Darnell or yeah, when the one guy that runs the shop gets killed
Mhm.
in his house, I mean, I don't know how you would ever do that anyway, because how the car gets into the house and like stalks him down in the house without completely just pulling the house down onto itself. Overall, though, I would say that um, I really thought it was an even though it's not my favorite Stephen King story really at all. Um, I feel like it's a decent adaptation. Um, and I don't know that if they were to like, I couldn't see any need to remake this at all.
Mm.
Even though I know that there were key points to the movie or to the story left out, but overall, I was okay with it.
Yeah, I would agree. I do, I think if they would try and remake it now, the the things that I love about the older movies with more of, like, the practical effects, like, the best scene in this movie is when Christine is just in smithereens, totally wrecked, and then starts to, like, pop herself back to brand new, and the way that they filmed that, like, in reverse, um, it just wouldn't be the same if they did it now, you know, because they wouldn't do any of those cool old filmmaking tricks, it would just be CGI.
Oh
And
yeah. Oh, AI stuff.
yes, and I think especially kind of going back to what we were saying in the beginning about how the story feels like it was set in a different time. I think if they would try and remake it in this day and age, especially with, all of the different filmmaking tricks, the different lighting and cameras, and how everything filmed today, even if it's supposed to be set in the 80s, looks like it was filmed today and feels like it was set today. I think that's what's so cool about these older movies is that you watch them and they feel older. They feel vintage. And I just don't think I think that this is a decent adaptation. I would agree with you there. I don't I don't want to see it be remade.
I think up to this point, we've gotten, for the most part, we've been pretty lucky. This is what, our seventh or eighth episode. And for the most part, up to this point, the adaptations have been good. Some have been great. But even the ones that aren't good or great, they're still okay. Like this one, like it's not a
Yeah.
horrible movie. It's not my favorite movie, but it's an okay adaptation. But I do think that before too awful long, I think we're starting to get into the territory of the bad adaptations. Because next month is Children of the Corn, and I haven't read or watched Children of the Corn in probably at least 30 years. So, but I think there's going to be a period of like, I would have to look at the list, but I'm pretty sure we're going to get to a point where like there's going to be a more than 1 month in a row where like, all right, here's another one we had to like. The book wasn't bad, but man, that movie was hard to get through.
We can just find like the humor in the bad.
Yeah.
With how
So
with how wide ranged Stephen King's works have been, there's bound to be some turds in the pile of gold.
we'll leave it there. Be sure to like, share, subscribe, all that stuff, and we will talk to you guys next time.